to episode 9 of our writing room. And I'm Donna Alward. I'm here with Barbara Tanner-Wallace, and we're going to tackle the next topic in our Book in a Year series. We are besties, and writing craft gets us, like, we really nerd out when we start talking about that.
Totally. This is one of my favorite topics, too.
I was just going to say the same, that this is a really fun topic. And so we're going to talk about point of view. And it's probably one of my favorites to talk about.
I love it.
All right.
So, before we start, though, we're going to pause from it because we wanted to reiterate something. I know we've said it on other shows, but we here at the Writing Room have a great commandment that we think every writer needs to remember. Do you want to say it, or should I just put it up on the screen?
No, we just bring it up.
All right. Let me get back to the right slide.
There it is.
There we go. The great commandment is the best choice is the choice that best suits the story.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that rule trumps every other rule. We will tell you every workshop you go to, it's what suits the story. Because you're going to hear a lot of different pieces of advice over your lifetime as a writer. We're going to go to a conference in a couple weeks, and we're going to take diligent notes and get even more advice. And the best piece of advice I think I ever got was from Susan Meisner, who said, "Do what suits the story."
Yeah, whatever you do, it has to serve the story, and it's one of those things where, you know, they always say you have to know the rules before you break them, but you know, you'll find yourself maybe doing things that you really thought you never would when you were writing, but you do it because it's what's right for the story.
Right. That said, it does help to kind of know the rules. So today we're going to talk about point of view, which is, like we just said, one of our favorites. You've got your plot, you've got your goals, your motivations, and conflicts for your characters, and you're ready to get it down, right? We just talked about beginnings last month. Right. Ready to start. So now the question is, who's going to tell the story and how? And there are many, many types of point of view. We are going to kind of focus on the two most common ones, which are first person and third person. There are, I think I counted it, I think there's like 6 or 7 different ways you can do point of view. There's the omniscient, where you're looking at everything right down to the most narrow. The two that most people use are first and third. The first person story is told directly through the character. You're getting a tighter, more intimate perspective. There's a lot more opportunity for intrigue, because if you're doing it through one character, they can be unreliable, they can lie, they can mislead you. We've read some great books where the person's telling the story. I can't remember now what story it was that I read. I think it was A Simple Favor. And she was telling the story, and you don't realize until maybe halfway through that she's not all together there. And that's when you start realizing, like, okay, so what she's seeing isn't actually maybe not what happening. And you can do that when you're doing the first person. The third person steps it back a little, and the narrator tells the story, but they're aware of the thoughts and feelings of the character. This lets you have more than one perspective, which is good, because the first person can be kind of narrow if you have a lot of moving parts in a story. The downside of this is if you get too many points of view, you confuse the reader. And in both cases, deciding how to do the tense can be tricky.
Right. And so I think something that's really handy to remember is that in first person, your pronouns are going to be I, and like me and my for possessives. And then when you're looking at third person, your pronouns that are going to be through your viewpoint character are going to be he, she, or they or them. And so that's how you kind of know right away if you're in first or you're in third.
Okay, now let me ask you this. I'm going off script, but I just thought of this, and you're an editor, so we'll ask this question. With the current pronoun issue going on in the world, where people have different pronouns, is it preferred that, how do you balance that with putting theys in, or how do you, I suppose you have to set it up before you start it, but.
I haven't found any difficulty, or it hasn't been muddy.
Okay, well, I'm just thinking, like, if you have a non-binary character, do you set it up as their they? Like, to explain it that they're non-binary at the beginning, or do you, stuff like that?
I wrote a non-binary secondary character. That wasn't about making a point of having a non-binary secondary character. They just were. And so, and just anytime I refer to them as they, them, just like I would if I were out somewhere. And so hopefully I haven't heard any feedback that anybody thought that was confusing or didn't understand why I used they, them for that person.
But that's something people should keep in mind when they're doing the third person.
Yeah. So in the book that you are, okay, you can choose either the book that you've finished or the book that you're researching / starting right now. What point of view are you using?
The last book was first person because they were recounting a story, and it was more powerful for them to talk about it because it was their experience with this woman.
Right.
The next book is third person.
Interesting.
I think it may change, but right now I think I want to do third person. You recently had your editor change, or not editor, but after talking to your editor, changed your book from third to first.
Yeah, so I had 2 points of view, and one was first and one was third. And the point of view character that was third person was probably more like 60% of the story, and the other first person character is more like 40% of the story. And then I ended up with changing that bigger character to first person in revisions. But the benefit of that is that it creates more intimacy. I guess intimacy is probably the best word I want to use, where there's intimacy between the reader and the character because there's no additional barrier of any sort. When you're in that character's head as you're reading and they're referring to themselves as I, it really is quite intimate. So, it's as simple as something like, she went somewhere and then I went somewhere. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, I'm I when you're reading, right? Because so it is. And then the point of view that you choose often drives your verb tense. So for example, in first person, generally you can either use first person present, which is like I walk out the door, or first person past tense, which is I walked out the door. And both work. And I used first person past. And I just find it smoother. But in third person, it's unusual to see a present tense. Like she walks to the door and opens it.
No, the books that are present tense I've seen are more first person.
Right.
Or second person, which is a whole other story.
Right. But third person generally, the most common would be third person past tense. So she walked to the door, opened it, whatever, greeted whoever. So sometimes the point of view that you choose also dictates your verb tense.
Going back to the first person one, I think that if you have a character that's going to be a strong central character, especially if it's a series character, first person is great because it lets you, if that person is probably going to have that character is going to have a strong personality driving the book. I'm thinking mostly of series books where it's the same characters appearing in multiple books. By having it first person, you really can capture their personality better. I know I did that with my cozies. I think you see that with a lot of cozies and a lot of mysteries.
Right. I'm seeing it in a lot of historical now. Like even now, I would say the majority of the books that I read are first person, which is kind of funny because coming from romance land, unless I was reading like something like rom-com, but went straight up small town, like most of them were in third person. So this is my first person book after like 65.
And it's a lot of fun. So.
It was a lot of fun. And here's a little thing that's neat is that, I can't believe we're still just on our first point, but that when I went to change Nora's character from third person to first, I felt like sometimes when I'm writing first person and I'm writing about something that, I'm using past tense, but then I write about something that happened in the more distant past, my verb tense will get a little muddy. But when I switched from third to first, it felt like it was just so solid because I'd written it in third, the first time. And so that was actually really helpful because I could look at it and go, oh yeah, like it just felt like my verb tense was a lot more solid.
Well, and here's my last little tip for this is when I was writing third person for romance, if it was a particularly emotional scene or I was having trouble getting into the book, I almost always wrote it in first person. And then I would go back and put it into third so that I could really get the character's feelings. And I will not take credit for that. There was a romance author named Jo Beverly, who is one of the great romance authors of all time. I went to a workshop and she's the one that suggested that.
Yeah.
And that's why she was one of the greats of all time. Because it really did nail the emotional scenes.
And I think that's part of why, so why I ended up changing Nora's character to first person was because my editor made the comment that like it wasn't quite emotional enough and it just, there seemed to be a little extra distance. So once I did that, just the act of changing it to first person automatically brought more emotion to it. And then I layered little bits in and it was so much better. So much better.
Yep.
All
okay,
right.
so slide number 2.
Number 2.
After you pick, this is actually probably going to go hand in hand.
Right. So it's choosing your point of view characters. So how many are you going to have? Are you going to have 1? Are you going to have 2? Are you going to have more than 2? And it's really whose voice do we need to hear and whose head do we have to be in? And most stories have 1 or 2. Some have 3. The more voices you have, the more difficult it is to keep track. And to also give each character a complete story arc, because sometimes if it's too fragmented, then, each character's story is then, a smaller portion of the book. One of the best examples of, I think there were 5 points of view was Julia Kelly's The Last Garden in England.
Yes.
And I thought she did that brilliantly, but oh my God, 5 points of view. And it's not just keeping track of what everyone's doing, it's figuring out how to place those scenes in your book for pacing. Like it was brilliantly done, but what a bunch of work.
Well, and a lot of it is how to pay, where you have to place it, which is a whole nother topic because which when we talk about pacing in the future,
right,
it can affect the pacing, especially if you're alternating between people and you try to, sometimes people fall into the habit of falling into like, okay, character A, character B, character C, character A, character B, character C.
right.
And that screws up your pacing.
And that can work really well if it serves your story. but it's one of those things that I think you have to be flexible and see what fits for pacing and balancing it out. So
in addition to choosing your POV, we choose how many.
Right.
I suppose it falls under the same thing. So
right.
Choose who and how many.
Right. And so when you choose who your point of view character or characters are going to be, it's really about choosing, again, whose head we have to be in, and then looking at the stakes. So if we go to a scene level and you ask yourself who has the most at stake in this scene, or whose reaction drives this scene, that should be the point of view character that you choose. So the example that we have is Patty, Doug, and Victor. So Doug is dying and he's in Patty's arms. And so, and Victor is in the room. And so who do we think has the most at stake? And you would, think Patty, right? Because there's so much emotion. She's holding her dying husband in her arms. But like, what if Victor is Doug's killer? And, he's killed him as part of a plan to win Patty's heart and then get his hands on Doug's assets, really not just Patty's assets. And then, so perhaps you want to be in the villain's head in this particular scene. Perhaps you even want to be maybe even in Doug's head if he knows what's going on and he can't like he can't talk, he can't verbalize it. Like it really is who has the most at stake. And I will say there have been times when if I find the story is lagging or something just isn't quite working, sometimes I will take a scene and switch the point of view to a different character and see if that fixes it. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes that will help me deal with a saggy scene.
One other caveat I will put in, and again, it's if it suits the story, but the other caveat is if you are going to choose a POV, try to use them more than once. Don't just randomly shove a point of view character in one scene.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, unless you really have a very, very good reason for doing it, try to be consistent with your point of view.
Yeah, no, your point of view character should be someone who is consistently throughout, in my opinion, consistently throughout the book, with an arc of some sort. They're not just there because, you know, they're important to this scene and then never to be seen again.
That said, limit your POV choices. That's
Exactly.
following what I just said. You do not want to have every POV in the scene. Okay, try to limit it to one person per scene. Frequently, it's an action reaction. You can switch in the middle of the scene to have another character react, but try to keep it to about 2 POVs per scene. And again,
at most.
At most, and again, that is who's driving the scene. So you can have the same scene in a chapter and split. Like I said, the action starts with one point of view, but then the person's reaction next to them should be a good point of view to go to. Saying that, I'm trying to put it in the right words. You do not want to flip flop. You don't want to like have them, you know, Jim's point of view, and then the next line is Kelly's, and then Jim, and then Kelly. It's stay with one person for that scene.
Right.
And then if you're going to have a reaction, a great way to do it is to, you know, pass something or have a door open or something where you move the action to the next POV character.
Right. Or a huge emotional beat where and then you end up crafting some sort of a like an end of scene sort of hook that leads into the point of view switch. Right. And you know, your point of view switch can be mid-scene, or you can start a new chapter that, you know, with it. Depending on how you want it to be affected by pacing.
Right.
So I can't wait till we talk about pacing.
Well, and I think it's like it depends on how some people do it, where they set their short chapters. Some people divide it up with an asterisk. I have seen POV changes where it's simply a case of someone passing a letter. You know, Barb took the letter and passed it to Donna, and Donna opens the letter, and suddenly you're in Donna's. But you had that action which said, "I'm moving it over to Donna."
Generally, when we look at formatting, so if it's a complete scene break of time and character, then we put an asterisk or whatever. When you're formatting, it's whatever nice little graphic that you use. And then if it's just a point of view change, there's an extra space just to kind of delineate that point of view is changing, unless you do a chapter break.
And then tip number 4 is let all your characters' life experiences control their point of view. Going back when I said we're talking about the narrow point of view with first person, but it's with every character. They can only think and see what they know.
Right.
So they don't know what's going on behind the door. They don't have magic vision, no matter what the point of view is. But the other part of it is their life experience should drive that, so that, you know, for example, a real estate agent is going to look at a house differently than an expectant mother. Someone who is an LGBTQ character might look at a situation far differently than a middle-aged white male or a black character. How they've lived their life is going to color how they see things. It's the same as in any other situation. I mean, it's in real life. That's people see things the way because of what their experiences have been. You and I are never going to see the same way because we're 2 different people. And so your characters should be 2 different people, and not only their life experiences, but their character arc. What they're focusing on as far as their growth, that should also color their point of view.
Right. And that goes back to when we talked about character and backstory and knowing what has shaped them, because everything that came before now informs everything that they think and feel and do.
Right. And it's going to be reflected through their point of view.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which actually takes us sort of into number 5, which is think of POV or point of view as a camera, and you want to have a variety of shots. So sometimes you'll want a wide view, which is a little more omniscient, where it's very broad in scope. And a lot of times this is, if you're making, I would say transition paragraphs tend to be broad scope, where they aren't really deep in someone's point of view. And so if you need to impart some information or change the scene or set up, like, it's a bit broader, and then you narrow it down when you get close up into the character's psyche and get into deep point of view. And when you get in nice and deep like that, so the broad strokes are really telling, right? And I know we always say show, don't tell. And it's true, but sometimes a little bit of telling is good, because those are the bridging pieces that kind of connect things together. And but then you want to show through your characters' senses, their feelings, how they see and interpret what's happening. And so then knowing, again, we're going to go back to pacing again, but knowing when to have your lens wide and knowing when you want your lens to be narrow on that character really helps with keeping the pace moving in your story, which, we're going to tackle that soon. And don't be afraid to mix it up with point of view. For example, I had written one character in first person, the other in third. And while that didn't work for this particular story, I've seen it work in other stories, and it's perfectly fine to do that. Or perhaps you want to, if you have a dual timeline, perhaps you want one timeline in first person and the other one in third, or whatever you want to do. So, we just take it back to kind of that great commandment of writing, which is the best choice is the choice that suits the story.
One of the things I like about calling it a camera is because, like, if you watch a television show, you don't want, a stage play, you're looking at everything in one big one. You have no choice. But a television show, you get to go close up into an expression, you get to pull out, and you let the emotion drive where your POV is. My favorite post point of view book is called, it's Alicia Rasley's it's called Alicia Rasley's Elements of Point of View. It's a fantastic book. I recommend it. I'll put the link in the thing. But one of the things she talks about is, like, sometimes in the most emotional moments, you actually want to go wide. And she gives an example of, of rushing to an accident and the person's dying, and you pull back and, they loaded him into the ambulance. I watched the door shut. I watched it drive away. But because you want to put that distance to give it kind of a forlorn feeling. And that's where we're saying, think of it as a camera. Sometimes you want to pan back to the wider shot so that you do want that emotional distance, because you want to feel their emotional distance.
You think about how many times you watch a movie and, after something really, really intense and perhaps intimate, then it shifts into something a bit broader that sort of leads us into the next thing. Not everything has to be, it's a scene and sequel thing, which, we could do a whole show on scene and sequel.
Episode 19 of 8.
I know, right? But and this is one of the reasons why I have a hard time talking about craft, is because everything is so connected.
It is. The thing that I like to say about using it as a camera also is using one technique is boring. That's why you want variety. You don't want to read all deep point of view and
you need to catch your breath at some time.
Right. And when we say deep point of view, you are so into the character's head that you're not getting any of you don't get any narrator extras. Even if you're doing third person, you're right in their thoughts. You're like, Jim picked up the chipped cup. I remember when Jimmy threw this against the window and chipped.
And your lens really is through their eyes rather than seeing anything other than what that character sees. So sometimes you do have to pan out a little bit.
That's right. And it's like deep point of view is not always full sentences. Sometimes it's so tight that you could not do that for a whole book, or you could, but it would be very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and sometimes that just keeps too much tension, and you do need to release the tension a little bit and then ratchet it back up again. There is an ebb and flow to every story.
We could probably do a whole episode just on deep point of view.
We really could.
We could. If people want that,
we could do a whole episode on everything.
Yes, let us know.
And then go back and do it again.
Let us know what sort of things. But those are our 5 tips, broad tips. We only have a half hour, so we can't possibly go into too much detail. But those are our 5 tips for it. I can't believe it's already May.
I know, it's like in the end of May.
I can't believe it. Next month, we are doing the London Seance Society is our book chat. It's on June 6th. We're a little early. No, we're not. No, we're right on time.
No, we're not. We're on hiatus next week, so
we are.
It's 2 weeks from today.
But this was a good book. It was her sophomore book. She was the first one. The Lost Apothecary was fantastic. It's going to be interesting to see if both of us thought she nailed it. It is very hard for a sophomore book to be as good as a breakout book when it's such a huge hit.
Yeah.
And it's kind of unfair to the author because even if she does a great job, she's battling such a huge bar that you're like, well, but it wasn't as great. So it'd be very interesting to hear what people think. And I really hope that people will show up and tell us what they think and join the chat.
Yep. And then I'm sure we should really try to do some sort of a quick, just like a Facebook Live or something from San Antonio when we're there.
Yep. Our next craft one is going to be tips that we've learned at the next conference we go to. So
it's going to be kind of a recap of what happened at conference. It'll be a fun show, I think, because we'll be all hyped up from being at conference.
And then you have an interview coming up that I won't be at, but
yeah, because you're going to be gallivanting. Yeah. We're going to be talking to Bryn Turnbull about her new release, which is The Paris Deception.
And I'll tell you right now, I started it last night, and it's gasp worthy.
Oh.
She nails the emotions in it. I
haven't started it yet, so honestly, it's my fly on the plane book when I go to San Antonio for conference. So
I can already tell it's a winner.
Ugh.
So
so many good books, so many.
So thank you all for coming. If you like this, we do this once a month. We do 3 shows a month, but we do the writing room once a month towards the end of the month. You can like and subscribe us at youtube.com/StepIntoTheStory. And I don't know why I threw another .com in there. I think I just felt like it. Or you can join our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/groups/StepIntoTheStory.
That's it.
So,
all right.
We look forward to seeing you, and we'll see you next week.